Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Tides of Betrayal. The North Atlantic stretched endlessly before the cargo vessel Iron Maiden, her hull cutting through 12-foot swells with the precision of a blade. Captain Hubert Floyd stood on the bridge, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he monitored the approaching storm system. 23 years of commanding these metal behemoths had taught him to read the ocean's moods like a lover's whispers. Every shift in wind, every change in the water's color spoke to him. At 52, Hubert possessed the kind of presence that made seasoned sailors step aside when he walked the deck. His steel-gray eyes held depths that mirrored the waters he commanded, and his silence carried more weight than most men's words. The crew respected him not just for his seamanship, but for the quiet ruthlessness that emerged when crossed. In 23 years, he'd never backed down from a fight, whether against nature or man. His mind wandered to home, a sprawling colonial in Marblehead, Massachusetts, that he'd bought with 15 years of saved wages. Lorna had fallen in love with the place the moment she saw it, running her fingers along the crown molding while their son bred. Then ate, raced up and down the hardwood stairs. Those had been better days, when coming home meant something more than just time between voyages. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through his thoughts like a foghorn. Hubert glanced at the caller ID, Marblehead Police Department. His stomach clenched. In his line of work, calls from home usually meant someone was dead or missing. Captain Floyd speaking. Captain, this is Officer Williams with Marblehead PD. We have your son Brett here at the station. He's safe, but, sir, he's been living rough for about a month. We found him at a Shell station on Route 114, asking customers for food money. The world seemed to tilt beneath Hubert's feet. Brett was supposed to be at home, finishing his junior year at Marblehead High. What do you mean living rough? Where's his mother? A pause. Then, sir, maybe you should talk to your son directly. The phone exchanged hands, and Brett's voice came through, older, rougher than Hubert remembered. Dad. The word cracked like a whip. Son, what the hell is going on? Mom's got this new guy, Ricardo Carr. Brett's voice caught. When I wouldn't call him father like she wanted, they kicked me out. Said if I couldn't respect the new man of the house, I could find somewhere else to live. The satellite phone felt like it might crack in Hubert's grip. They what? I've been sleeping in the woods behind Crocker Park, Dad. Trying to finish school, but... Brett's voice dissolved into sobs. I'm so hungry, and it's been raining, and I just want to come home. Captain Rodriguez, Hubert's first officer, watched from across the bridge as his captain's face transformed. The weathered features hardened into something that belonged more on an executioner than a mariner. When Hubert spoke into the radio moments later, his voice carried the finality of a death sentence. This is Captain Floyd to Marine Traffic Control, requesting immediate emergency shore leave. Family crisis. Captain, you're 3 days out from Boston Harbor. Hubert keyed the radio again. Launch the fast boat. Now, Rodriguez had sailed with Hubert for 8 years. He'd seen his captain face down storms that sank other vessels, negotiate with pirates off Somalia, and stare down Coast Guard officers who thought they could muscle a civilian captain. But he'd never seen this look, the expression of a man who'd just discovered that everything he'd built had been torn down in his absence. Captain, Rodriguez said carefully, the company won't authorize. The company, Hubert replied, his voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous, can bill me for the boat. Have Kowalski prep the Zodiac. I'll be sure in 18 hours instead of 3 days. As Rodriguez hurried to comply, Hubert remained at the bridge windows, watching the horizon. Behind those steel-gray eyes, something cold and calculating was taking shape. Lorna thought she could give away his house, replace him in his son's life, and cast his boy out like garbage. Ricardo Carr thought he could step into another man's home and play father to another man's child. They had no idea what was coming for them, but they would learn. Oh, how they would learn. Chapter 2. Foundations of Fury. The Zodiac's hull slammed against the waves as Hubert pushed the twin outboards to their limits, Boston's skyline growing larger with each passing hour. 18 hours on the water had given him time to think, to plan, to let the cold fury settle into something far more dangerous, calculated rage. His mind drifted back to 15 years ago, when he'd first met Lorna Simpson at a maritime industry cocktail party in Boston. She'd been working as an event coordinator, all blonde hair and bright smiles, fascinated by his stories of storms and distant ports. She was 32 to his 37, with an innocence that drew him like a moth to flame. They'd married within 8 months, and Brett had come 2 years later. For 13 years, it had worked. Hubert would spend 4 to 6 months at sea, then return for 2 months at home. Lorna seemed content with the arrangement. The house was paid for, she had her friends and her book club, and Brett was growing into a good kid. When Hubert was home, they'd take sailing trips on his 30-foot sloop, where he'd teach Brett navigation and seamanship. But something had changed in the last 2 years. Lorna had grown distant during his shore leaves, spending more time with her hiking group and less time with him. She'd started talking about him being gone too much, about Brett needing a father figure around more often. Hubert had dismissed it as empty nest syndrome. Brett was 16, almost a man himself. How wrong he'd been. The Zodiac's GPS showed him 12 miles from Boston Harbor. Hubert pulled out his satellite phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 5 years. Santana Investigations, this is Clyde. Clyde, it's Hubert Floyd. A pause. Jesus, Hubert. Been a while. Thought you were still pushing cargo around the Atlantic. I am. But I need a favor, and I need it fast. Clyde Santana had been Hubert's first officer 15 years ago, before a back injury forced him ashore. Now he ran a private investigation firm in Boston that specialized in maritime insurance fraud and other things that companies preferred to keep quiet. What do you need? Complete background on a Ricardo car. He's involved with my wife. I want to know everything. Where he comes from, what he does for work, where he's been, who he knows. And I want to buy tomorrow night. Hubert, whatever you're thinking, I'm not thinking anything yet. I'm just gathering information. Another pause. All right, but be careful. And if you need anything else, anything that requires discretion, you know my number. Hubert understood. Clyde's client list included shipping companies who needed problems solved quietly, insurers who suspected fraud, and occasionally, individuals who required services that existed in legal gray areas. It was a world Hubert had brushed against during his years commanding vessels through some of the world's less stable regions. 3 hours later, Hubert tied the Zodiac up at a private marina in Charlestown. His truck sat where he'd left it, in a long-term parking area. The drive to Marblehead took 40 minutes through late afternoon traffic, and with each mile, his resolve hardened. The house looked different. Ricardo's black BMW sat in Hubert's spot in the driveway. New outdoor furniture graced the back deck. The garden beds had been rearranged. Small changes, but they screamed of ownership, a new man marking his territory. Hubert parked on the street and walked to the front door. He still had his key, but something made him ring the doorbell instead. He wanted to see their faces when they realized he was home early. Lorna answered the door, and her complexion went from rosy to paper white in seconds. Hubert, you're not supposed to be home for another week? No, I'm not. He studied his wife's face. She was still beautiful at 47, but there was something harder about her now, more calculating. We need to talk. This isn't a good time. About our son being homeless. About some stranger living in my house. About you throwing away everything we built. His voice remained level, conversational. That's what made it terrifying. From the living room came a man's voice. Lorna? Who's at the door? Ricardo Carr appeared behind her, 6 feet tall, maybe 45, with the soft look of a man who'd never done a day of real work. He wore khakis and a polo shirt like he was headed to a country club, and his handshake was exactly as weak as Hubert had expected. You must be Hubert. I've heard so much about you. Have you? Hubert stepped inside without invitation. His house. His rules. Funny thing is, I hadn't heard anything about you until today, when the police called to tell me my son was starving in the woods. Lorna's face flushed. Brett was being impossible. He wouldn't accept Ricardo as part of the family, because Ricardo isn't part of this family. Hubert's voice carried the same quiet authority he used to command a bridge full of officers. This is my house. Brett is my son. And you, he looked at Ricardo. are a guest who's overstayed his welcome. Ricardo stepped forward, puffing up like a bantam rooster. Now look here, Hubert. Lorna and I have been together for 2 years. I know this is your house legally, but emotionally, practically, we've built a life here. 2 years. Hubert repeated the words like he was tasting poison. While I was at sea, supporting this household, you were here playing house with my wife. Hubert, please, Lorna said. Let's be civilized about this. We can work something out. You're absolutely right. We can work something out. Hubert smiled, and both Lorna and Ricardo took an unconscious step backward. I'm going to get my son. Then I'm going to make some arrangements. And then, Ricardo, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about respect. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Oh, and Ricardo, next time you see my boy, you'll address him as sir. Because after what you've put him through, you don't deserve to speak his name. The door closed behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Chapter 3. Blood and Water. The Marblehead police station sat on a quiet side street, its brick facade unchanged since Hubert's own teenage years. Officer Williams was a local kid, maybe 25, who'd probably grown up hearing stories about the Floyd family. Hubert's father had been a respected lobsterman before him, and the Floyd name carried weight in the coastal community. Brett sat in a plastic chair in the station's front office, wearing clothes that had clearly seen too many nights outdoors. He'd grown taller in the months since Hubert had last been home, but he'd also grown thinner. The boy's eyes held a wariness that no 17-year-old should possess. Dad, Brett stood when he saw Hubert enter, and for a moment, father and son just looked at each other. Then Brett stepped forward, and Hubert pulled him into an embrace that lasted 30 seconds and felt like 30 years. It's all right, son. It's all right now. Officer Williams approached them carefully. Captain Floyd, we'll need to discuss arrangements for Brett's care. Brett will be staying with me. Hubert's tone left no room for argument. I'll be taking shore leave until this situation is resolved. And your wife? My wife, Hubert said slowly, made her choice when she threw my son into the street. I'll be making mine accordingly. 20 minutes later, father and son sat in a booth at Driftwood Danny's, a waterfront diner that had been feeding fishermen and sailors for 60 years. Brett attacked a cheeseburger and fries like he hadn't eaten in days, which Hubert realized with growing fury he probably hadn't. Tell me everything, Hubert said, from the beginning. Brett wiped his mouth and leaned back in the booth. Mom started dating Ricardo about 2 years ago, right after you left for that run to Hamburg. At first it was just dinner dates, but then he started staying over. By last Christmas, he was practically living there. And you never told me. Mom said not to. Said it would just upset you, and you'd be home soon enough anyway. Brett's voice carried the guilt of a child caught between warring parents. I figured. I don't know. I figured it was just something she was going through. You know how she gets when you're gone for a long time. Hubert didn't know. Lorna had always struggled with the isolation that came with being a mariner's wife. But this was different. This was betrayal. What did things change? Around Easter, Ricardo started acting like he owned the place, moving furniture around, talking about improving things. He kept pushing me to call him dad or father, and when I refused, Mom backed him up. Brett's hands clenched into fists. He said I was disrespecting his position in the household. Can you believe that shit? Language, Hubert said automatically, but his heart wasn't in it. Sorry, but Dad, he's nothing like you. He's soft, whiny, always complaining about things. Works some desk job in Boston, drives that fancy BMW like it makes him special. And Mom acts different around him, like she's trying to be someone else. How different? Brett considered the question carefully. Remember how Mom used to be? How she'd joke around, cook those big Sunday dinners, talk about wanting to sail to the Caribbean with you when I graduated. All that's gone. Now she's all about Ricardo's friends, Ricardo's country club, Ricardo's plans for renovating the house. It's like she erased our whole family to make room for his. The rage in Hubert's chest burned hotter, but his voice remained calm. When did they throw you out? 2 weeks ago. I came home from school and found them in your study, going through your ship models and charts. Ricardo was talking about converting it into a home office. I told him to get his hands off your things, and he said I needed to accept that changes were coming whether I liked it or not. Brett paused, clearly struggling with the memory. Then Mom came in and took his side. Said I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. Ricardo started in about how I needed to learn my place in his house. I told him it wasn't his house, it was yours, and I'd be damned if I'd call him father. Brett looked down at his hands. That's when Mom said if I couldn't accept the new family structure, maybe I needed to find somewhere else to live until I could grow up. They actually threw you out. Mom packed a bag for me. Said I could come back when I was ready to apologize and accept Ricardo as my stepfather. But Dad, I can't. I won't. This is our house, our family. He's just some guy who... Brett. Hubert reached across the table and gripped his son's shoulder. You did exactly right. You honored your family, and you honored me. Don't you ever apologize for that. Relief flooded Brett's face. So what do we do now? Hubert was quiet for a long moment, watching the harbor through the diner's salt-stained windows. A plan was forming in his mind, something complex and careful and absolutely ruthless. Lorna and Ricardo thought they'd won. They'd claimed his house, his family, his life, and tossed aside the inconvenient remnants. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Now, Hubert smiled, and Brett felt a chill run down his spine. Now we're going to teach your mother and her boyfriend about the difference between a house and a home, and about what happens when you threaten a Floyd's family. Dad, are you going to? I'm going to do what I have to do. Hubert's voice carried the weight of 23 years commanding vessels through storms and pirates and worse. But first, we're getting you a hot shower and clean clothes. Then we're going to have a talk about what comes next. As they left the diner, Brett couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. His father had always been a strong, quiet presence in their family, but this was different. This was the emergence of something harder, colder, more dangerous. And for the first time in a month, Brett Floyd felt safe. Chapter 4, Deep Currents. The Marriott courtyard in Peabody wasn't much, but it served Hubert's purposes. 2 adjoining rooms, far enough from Marblehead to avoid awkward encounters, close enough to keep an eye on the situation. Brett fell asleep within minutes of hitting the shower, the exhaustion of months' rough living finally catching up with him. Hubert sat in the connecting room, his laptop open on the small desk, working through the logistics of what came next. First, he needed information. Second, he needed leverage. Third, he needed a plan that would leave Lorna and Ricardo with nowhere to run and no one to turn to. His phone buzzed. A text from Clyde Santana. Initial report attached. This guy's got some interesting history. Call me. Hubert opened the attachment and began to read. Ricardo Carr, age 43, born in Providence, Rhode Island. Currently employed as a regional sales manager for Pinnacle Medical Devices, a job he'd held for 3 years. Before that, a string of positions in pharmaceutical sales, medical equipment, and healthcare consulting. Nothing criminal, but a pattern of jumping from company to company every 2 to 3 years. More interesting was Ricardo's personal history. Divorced twice, first from Jennifer Carr in 2015, second from Michelle Carr in 2019. Both divorces cited irreconcilable differences, but the financial records told a different story. Ricardo had a talent for finding financially stable women, moving in quickly, and then leveraging their assets for his own comfort. Jennifer Carr had owned a successful catering business in Providence. During their marriage, Ricardo had convinced her to expand rapidly, taking on massive debt to open a second location. When the expansion failed, the business collapsed, and Jennifer lost everything. The divorce papers showed Ricardo walking away with $50,000 in cash and a BMW, while Jennifer was left with $200,000 in business loans. Michelle Carr had been a nurse practitioner with a substantial inheritance from her deceased parents. During their brief marriage, Ricardo had persuaded her to invest heavily in a guaranteed cryptocurrency venture run by one of his friends. The investment disappeared along with Ricardo when the scheme collapsed. Michelle was left financially ruined, while Ricardo relocated to Boston to start fresh. Now he'd found Lorna Floyd, a lonely mariner's wife with a fully paid house and access to her husband's substantial savings. Hubert closed the laptop and called Clyde. Tell me you're not planning to kill this guy, Clyde said by way of greeting. Nothing that direct. But I need more than just financial records. I need to know everything about his current situation. Who he talks to, where he goes, what his weaknesses are. Hubert, this sounds like protecting my family and my property from a professional con artist who's already destroyed 2 women's lives and is working on a third. A pause. Jesus. You really think he's running a long con on Lorna? I think Ricardo Carr is exactly what he appears to be. A parasite who moves from host to host, draining them dry before moving on. The question is, what's his endgame with my wife? Could be he's planning to push for a divorce. If Massachusetts recognizes his relationship with Lorna as common law marriage, he might be able to claim community property rights, especially if he can prove she abandoned the marital relationship by letting him move in. Hubert felt the familiar cold fury settle deeper into his bones. Find out more. I want to know everyone he's talked to in the last 6 months. Lawyers, real estate agents, financial advisors. And I want surveillance on him starting tomorrow. That's going to cost. I don't care what it costs. After ending the call, Hubert walked to the window overlooking Route 1. Traffic moved steadily through the New England night. People heading home to families, to houses they owned, to lives they'd built. Simple lives, uncomplicated by betrayal and theft. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hubert? It's me. Lorna's voice was softer than it had been that afternoon, more like the woman he'd married 15 years ago. What do you want? I want to talk. Really talk. About us, about Brett, about how we can work this out like adults. There's nothing to work out. You chose another man over your son. You chose a stranger over your husband. You made your decision. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Hubert kept his voice level, professional. You have 48 hours to get Ricardo out of my house and to arrange temporary living accommodations for yourself. After that, we'll discuss the terms of our separation. Hubert, please. I know you're angry, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through. Lorna. Her name came out like a command. In 23 years of marriage, you have never seen me truly angry. You've seen me irritated, frustrated, disappointed. But you have never seen me angry. Do not mistake my current civility for weakness. Silence on the line. 48 hours, he repeated and ended the call. Through the connecting door, he could hear Brett's steady breathing. His son was safe, fed, sheltered. That was step 1 accomplished. Steps 2 through 20 were going to be considerably more complex. Chapter 5. Strategic Positioning. The morning sun streamed through the hotel room windows as Hubert reviewed the expanded files Clyde had delivered overnight. Brett sat across from him, working through a stack of pancakes while reading the intelligence reports with the focused attention of a young man whose world had been turned upside down. Dad, this guy's a complete fraud. Professional fraud, Hubert corrected. There's a difference. Sloppy fraudsters get caught quickly. Professional ones operate in legal gray areas and leave their victims with no recourse. The additional surveillance had revealed interesting details about Ricardo's routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he drove into Boston for client meetings that actually consisted of 2-hour lunches at expensive restaurants with real estate attorneys. 3 times in the past month, he'd visited Seacoast Property Management, a firm that specialized in luxury coastal rentals. Most damning was a recorded phone conversation between Ricardo and someone named Preston Jordan, apparently a financial advisor. The house alone is worth $800,000, Ricardo's voice said through Clyde's recording equipment. No mortgage, owned free and clear. Plus, she's got access to her husband's retirement accounts, and he's been saving for 23 years. The guy makes serious money running those cargo ships. What about the son? Kid's a problem, but he's 17. 18 next year, then off to college. Besides, Lorna's coming around to the idea that cutting ties might be for the best. Fresh start, you know. Brett's face had gone white during the playback. They were planning to steal everything. They were planning to manipulate your mother into giving everything away legally, Hubert corrected. There's a difference, but the result would have been the same. Hubert's phone buzzed with a text from Clyde. Car meeting with divorce attorney David Hoffman, 10:30 a.m. Want me to follow? Hubert texted back, No, I'll handle this one personally. Brett, I need you to stay here today. Order room service, watch TV, rest. But I want you to call this number. He handed his son a business card. And tell Mickey Olson that you're Hubert Floyd's boy and you need a job starting next week. Mickey runs a marina in Salem. You'll work there while I sort this mess out. What are you going to do? I'm going to have some conversations with people who think they know more than they do. The law offices of Hoffman, Brennan, and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Boston. Hubert arrived 30 minutes before Ricardo's scheduled appointment and introduced himself to the receptionist as a potential new client seeking divorce representation. I'm sorry, Mr. Floyd, but Mr. Hoffman is completely booked today. Perhaps I could schedule you for later in the week. Actually, I'd like to sit in the waiting area for a few minutes, if that's all right. I'm considering a rather complex maritime divorce case, and I understand Mr. Hoffman has experience with unusual property divisions. The receptionist looked uncertain, but gestured toward the leather chairs near the windows. Hubert settled in with a maritime law journal and waited. Ricardo arrived precisely on time, looking nervous and overdressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He checked in with the receptionist and took a seat across from Hubert, never looking up from his phone. 20 minutes later, a secretary emerged from the inner office. Mr. Carr? Mr. Hoffman will see you now. Hubert gave them 5 minutes to get settled, then approached the receptionist again. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing that name, Carr. I believe that gentleman might be involved in a situation with my wife. Would it be possible to speak with Mr. Hoffman after his current appointment? It could be quite relevant to both cases. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. Oh my, let me check with Mr. Hoffman's assistant. 15 minutes later, Ricardo emerged from the office looking pale and shaken. He walked quickly past Hubert without making eye contact and disappeared into the elevator. 2 minutes after that, David Hoffman's secretary appeared in the waiting area. Mr. Floyd? Mr. Hoffman would like to speak with you immediately. David Hoffman was a sharp-featured man in his 50s who'd clearly seen every variation of human greed and stupidity that the divorce courts could offer. He gestured for Hubert to take a seat across from his desk. Mr. Floyd, I have to ask, are you by any chance married to Lorna Floyd? I am. And are you the Hubert Floyd who commands container ships for Atlantic Maritime? I am. Hoffman leaned back in his chair and studied Hubert carefully. Mr. Carr just spent 30 minutes outlining a strategy to claim community property, rights to your house, and liquid assets, based on the premise that your wife had effectively abandoned the marriage by allowing him to cohabitate for an extended period. Interesting strategy. Legally sound. In Massachusetts? Marginal at best. But with the right judge and the right presentation, it might have worked, especially if you had remained out of the country during proceedings. And now Mr. Carr has a problem, because I just informed him that representing him would constitute a conflict of interest, given that you were already here seeking representation for the same case. Hubert smiled. I assume you also informed him that his strategy was legally questionable at best? I did. I also suggested that his best course of action would be to immediately cease cohabitation with your wife and seek independent living arrangements. Continuing his current course could expose him to charges of fraud or theft by conversion. Sound advice. Mr. Floyd, I have to ask, what are your intentions regarding your marriage? Hubert considered the question carefully. My wife chose another man over her own son. She allowed that man to throw my boy into the street like garbage. She stood by while he planned to steal everything I've worked 23 years to build. He stood up. My intentions, Mr. Hoffman, are to ensure that both she and her boyfriend understand the consequences of those choices. And legally? Legally, I want a divorce that leaves me with full custody of my son and sole ownership of all marital assets. I want Lorna to receive exactly what she brought to this marriage 15 years ago. Nothing more, nothing less. Hoffman nodded slowly. That could be arranged. What about Mr. Carr? Mr. Carr, Hubert said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a judge passing sentence, is going to discover that stealing from the wrong person can be more expensive than he ever imagined. As Hubert left the lawyer's office, he felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces falling into place. Ricardo's legal strategy was neutralized. Lorna would soon realize that her boyfriend had no viable path to claim their property. And both of them were about to learn what happened when you threatened to Floyd's family. But the legal victory was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. Chapter 6, Pressure and Depth. The call came at 2:17 a.m., waking Hubert from the first sound sleep he'd had in days. Lorna's number showed on the caller ID, but when he answered, it was Ricardo's voice on the line. "Hubert, we need to talk." "No, we don't." Wait. Please. Things have gotten complicated. I think there's been some misunderstandings." "The only misunderstanding," Hubert said quietly, "is if you think calling me at 2 in the morning shows respect. Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But Lorna and we want to work something out. Some kind of arrangement that works for everyone." Hubert sat up in bed, fully awake now. In the next room, he could hear Brett stirring. "What kind of arrangement?" "Well, obviously you and Lorna need to figure out your marriage. That's between you two. But the house, maybe we could work out some kind of shared custody arrangement until the real estate market improves. I mean, it's a big house, plenty of room. You want to live in my house, with my wife, while I'm there. It doesn't have to be permanent. Just until everyone gets back on their feet, figures out their next steps." Hubert ended the call and immediately dialed Clyde. "Jesus, Hubert, it's 2 in the morning. I need active surveillance on Ricardo Carr, starting right now. And I need to know why he's desperate enough to call me at 2 a.m. with a proposal to share custody in my own house." "What happened?" Hubert summarized the conversation. Clyde whistled low. "That's either desperation or stupidity. Guys got to know that's never going to fly. Which means something's changed. Find out what." 3 hours later, Clyde called back with answers. Ricardo had been evicted from his Boston apartment the previous afternoon for non-payment of rent. His BMW had been repossessed 2 days before that, and Pinnacle Medical Devices had terminated his employment the previous week after discovering discrepancies in his expense reports. "Guy's been running on fumes for months," Clyde reported. "The only thing keeping him afloat has been whatever money Lorna's been giving him access to." "Has he been stealing from her directly?" "Not technically, but she's been paying for everything: groceries, utilities, his car insurance, credit card payments. Basically subsidizing his entire lifestyle while he pretended to be financially stable." Hubert felt the cold fury deepen. Not only had Ricardo conned his way into Lorna's bed in his house, he'd been bleeding them financially for months. "I want complete financial records on both of them. Bank statements, credit cards, everything. And I want to know everyone Ricardo's been in contact with in the last 48 hours. By noon, the picture was complete. Ricardo owed back rent on 2 different apartments, had defaulted on credit cards totaling nearly $30,000, and had been living entirely off Lorna's resources since losing his job. Worse, he convinced her to co-sign a personal loan for $15,000 just 2 weeks earlier, money that had immediately disappeared into his account to pay off previous debts. The surveillance team had followed Ricardo to 3 different locations that morning: a bankruptcy attorney's office, a payday loan store, and finally, a meeting with Preston Jordan at a Starbucks in Cambridge. The audio from that meeting was illuminating. "She's starting to ask questions about the money," Ricardo's voice said through the surveillance equipment. "And now her husband's back early, and he's not buying any of our explanations. How much have you gotten out of her total?" "Maybe 40,000 over the past 6 months. But that's gone. Use it to keep my head above water with other creditors." "What about the house?" "That's complicated now. The husband showed up at Hoffman's office yesterday. Somehow he knew exactly when I'd be there. Coincidence? I don't think so. This guy's no ordinary sailor. He's got connections, resources, and he's smart. Scary smart." A pause in the recording. Then Preston's voice again. "Maybe it's time to cut your losses. Take whatever cash you can get and disappear." "With what money?" "I'm broke, Preston. Completely tapped out. This was supposed to be my retirement score." "Then you better hope the husband doesn't figure out how much you've already taken her for. Because if he does..." "If he does what?" "If he does, you might want to consider a long vacation somewhere with no extradition treaties." Hubert closed the laptop and walked to the hotel window. Below, evening traffic moved steadily along Route 1. People heading home to normal lives with normal problems. He envied them, their simplicity. His phone rang. Lorna. Hubert, please. We need to talk. Really talk. About what? About Ricardo's situation. He's had some financial setbacks, and I think maybe he hasn't been completely honest about his circumstances. Has he been stealing from you? A long pause. Not stealing, exactly. But he's needed help with some debts, and I've been helping him get back on his feet. How much help? It's not about the money. How much, Lorna? Another pause. Maybe 30 or 40,000. But it's an investment in our future. Our future? You mean your future with him? I don't know what I mean anymore. Everything's so complicated, and you're home early, in Brett's situation, and Ricardo's lost his job. Hubert heard something in her voice he hadn't heard in years. Uncertainty. Fear. The confidence that had carried her through throwing out her own son was cracking. Lorna, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow morning, you're going to go to the bank and close any accounts that Ricardo has access to. You're going to cancel any credit cards with his name on them. And you're going to change the locks on the house. I can't do that. He has nowhere else to go. That's not your problem anymore. That's his problem. Hubert, I can't just throw him out. I'm not that kind of person. You threw out your own son. Silence. Then, quietly, that was different. Ow. Because what, Lorna? Because Brett's just a kid who couldn't fight back? Because he loved his father more than he feared your boyfriend? Because he had principles you couldn't break? That's not fair. Fair. Hubert's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. You want to talk about fair? Then let's talk about how you spent $40,000 of our money supporting a con artist while your son slept in the woods. He's not a con artist. He's just had some bad luck. His last two wives would disagree. Ask Jennifer Carr about her catering business. Ask Michelle Carr about her inheritance. Another long silence. How do you know about his ex-wives? Because I know everything, Lorna. Everything about his pattern of finding lonely women with assets. Everything about his debts and his lies and his plan to steal our house. Everything about the meetings with lawyers and real estate agents and financial advisors. You're having him watched. I'm protecting my family and my property from a professional thief. Hubert, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work it out together. No, we can't. Because you chose him over your own son. You chose a stranger over your husband. You made your choice, Lorna. Now you get to live with the consequences. What are you going to do? Hubert looked out at the traffic, at the normal people living normal lives, and felt the cold certainty settle into his bones. I'm going to give Ricardo Carr exactly what he deserves. And you're going to watch it happen. The line went dead. Chapter 7. Storm Warning. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Clyde called at 6 a.m. with an edge of urgency in his voice that Hubert had learned to respect. We've got a problem. Last night, after your conversation with Lorna, Ricardo made some calls. One of them was to a guy named Alejandro Goodwin in Providence. Who's Alejandro Goodwin? Muscle for hire. Used to work for some of the less reputable shipping unions, if you know what I mean. Specializes in intimidation, property damage, making problems disappear. Hubert felt the familiar cold focus that came with real danger. And Ricardo hired him for what? From what my guy could pick up, it sounds like Ricardo's convinced that you're going to destroy him financially and personally. He's decided to hit first. The conversation mentioned removing obstacles and clearing the field. He's planning to hurt my son. Or you. Or both. The good news is my surveillance team followed Goodwin to a hotel in Peabody last night. He's already in the area. Hubert was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Ricardo had just escalated from financial fraud to physical violence, which changed the rules of engagement completely. Pull your surveillance team back. I don't want them anywhere near this when it goes down. Hubert, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that Ricardo Carr just made the worst mistake of his life. And I'm thinking it's time to remind him that some people learned their problem-solving skills in places where lawyers and police don't matter. After ending the call, Hubert walked to the connecting door and knocked softly. Brett was already awake, reading one of his father's maritime law books. "Dad, you look serious." "Son, how would you feel about taking that job at Mickey's Marina starting today instead of next week?" "Fine, I guess." "Why?" "Because things are about to get complicated here, and I need you somewhere safe until they're resolved." Brett studied his father's face carefully. At 17, he'd inherited enough of Hubert's instincts to recognize when danger was approaching. "This is about Ricardo, isn't it?" "Ricardo's made some poor decisions. Now he's making worse ones." "What kind of worse ones?" Hubert sat on the edge of his son's bed. "The kind that threaten you and me. The kind that cross lines decent people don't cross." "So what are we going to do?" "We aren't going to do anything. You're going to go work at the marina, stay with Mickey's family for a few days, and let me handle this situation." "Dad, I'm not a kid anymore." "No, you're not. You're a young man who's shown more character in the last month than most adults show in a lifetime. But this isn't about character anymore. This is about something different." Brett looked at his father for a long moment. "You're going to hurt him, aren't you?" "I'm going to do whatever's necessary to protect my family and end this situation permanently." "Is that why you sent me to get my birth certificate and social security card yesterday and made me memorize those account numbers?" Hubert nodded. "Insurance. If something happens to me, you'll have everything you need to access the accounts I've set up for you. Mickey will help you with the legal aspects. Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not. But I've spent 23 years preparing for storms that might never come. This is just another kind of storm preparation." An hour later, Hubert dropped Brett at Olson's Marina in Salem. Mickey Olson was a leathery 60-year-old who'd served with Hubert's father in Vietnam before coming home to run his family's boatyard. He asked no questions when Hubert explained that Brett needed work and a safe place to stay for a while. "The boys got the Floyd look," Mickey observed, watching Brett organize marine supplies with methodical precision. "He'll do fine here. Mickey, if anyone comes around asking about him, anyone at all, you don't know where he is." "Understood. You need backup for whatever you're dealing with." "Not this time, but thank you." Driving back toward Marblehead, Hubert made a series of calls. First, to Clyde, requesting the current location of both Ricardo and Alejandro Goodwin. Second, to his bank, arranging to freeze access to all accounts that Lorna might have shared with Ricardo. Third, to his attorney, confirming that his will and estate planning were current. The fourth call was to a number he'd hoped never to use, a contact from his cargo runs through West Africa, where pirates and corrupt officials sometimes required solutions that existed outside normal channels. Edwin Randolph. "Edwin, it's Hubert Floyd." A pause. "Captain Floyd. Been a long time. Heard you were still pushing cargo across the Atlantic." "I am, but I've got a personal problem that requires someone with your particular skills." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where a man threatens my family and needs to be reminded of his place in the natural order." One of those problems. I assume this is time sensitive." "Very. The threat is active and immediate." "Location?" "Greater Boston area. I can provide details and payment arrangements if you're interested." "For you, Captain, consider it a professional courtesy. Text me the details." The final call was to Lorna. "Ricardo needs to leave the house immediately. Tonight." "Hubert, I can't just." "Lorna, listen to me very carefully. Ricardo has hired someone to hurt me and Brett. This is no longer about money or houses or hurt feelings. This is about violence. Real violence." "You're lying." "Ricardo wouldn't." "Ricardo absolutely would. And has. Check his record in Providence. Check what happened to his business partner 3 years ago when a dispute over money got physical." Silence. "I'm trying to give you one last chance to choose the right side. Get Ricardo out of my house and away from my family. Tonight, or what happens next, is going to be a lot worse than divorce papers and property division." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you. There's a difference. But the warning expires at midnight." Hubert ended the call and checked his watch. 4:30 p.m. Sunset was at 7:45. Whatever was going to happen would happen after dark, which was fine with him. Hubert Floyd had learned to navigate in storms that sank other ships, to command men in situations where weakness meant death, to make hard decisions when other people's lives hung in the balance. Ricardo Carr was about to discover what happened when you threatened a ship captain's family, and it was going to be a lesson he'd remember for the rest of his life, however long that turned out to be. Chapter 8, Dead Reckoning. The storm broke at 11:47 p.m. Hubert sat in his truck across from the house he'd bought 15 years ago, watching lights move behind the windows. Ricardo's BMW was gone, repoed 3 days earlier, but Lorna's Subaru sat in the driveway where it belonged. The house looked peaceful from the outside, almost normal. It wouldn't be peaceful much longer. His phone buzzed with a text from Edwin Randolph. Package delivered. Problem contained. Your move, Captain. Translation: Alejandro Goodwin would not be causing any more problems for anyone. Edwin's methods were efficient, permanent, and left no traceable connections to his clients. Ricardo's hired muscle had simply vanished, along with his employer's ability to escalate to violence. Now it was time to finish what Ricardo had started. Hubert's satellite phone, the encrypted one he used for certain cargo runs through unstable regions, rang once. A voice with a heavy Russian accent spoke without preamble. Captain Floyd? This is Christoph Rankin. You remember me from Lagos operation. Hubert remembered. Rankin had helped him recover stolen cargo from Nigerian pirates 2 years ago, using methods that the shipping company preferred not to discuss in their official reports. I remember. Edwin Randolph says you have problem that needs creative solution. Man who threatens your family, yes. That's correct. Good. I am in Boston on other business. Happy to help, old friend. You have target information. Hubert provided Ricardo's description, current location, and vehicle information. As he spoke, he saw movement in the house, Lorna passing by the living room window, talking on her phone. Target will be neutralized within 1 hour, Rankin said. Clean, no complications, no connections to you. As gift between professionals. Christoph. Captain, you saved my cargo and my crew when African pirates bore my vessel. Is small favor to return. Target simply disappears. No body, no evidence, no questions. Understood. Understood. The line went dead. Hubert sat in the dark truck, watching his house, feeling the cold certainty of what came next. In 60 minutes, Ricardo Carr would cease to be a problem. Permanently. But elimination of the threat was only part of the solution. The other part was making sure everyone understood why it had happened. At 12:15 a.m., Hubert's phone rang. Lorna. Hubert, something's wrong. Ricardo left to meet someone about a job opportunity, but that was 3 hours ago, and he's not answering his phone. Maybe his phone's dead. He always keeps it charged, and he was supposed to be back by 11. I'm getting worried. I'm sure he's fine. Could you maybe drive around and look for him? Check some of the places he goes. Hubert almost smiled. Even now, after everything Ricardo had done, Lorna was asking her husband to rescue her boyfriend. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not going to help you find a man who was planning to have me killed. A sharp intake of breath. That's impossible. Ricardo would never. He hired Alejandro Goodwin yesterday afternoon. Paid him $5,000 to remove obstacles. You want to guess who the obstacles were? Silence. But don't worry about Ricardo, Lorna. He's not going to be a problem anymore. What does that mean? It means he made a choice to threaten my family. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Hubert, what did you do? I protected my son. I protected myself. And I made sure that no one will ever again mistake my family for easy targets. Oh God. Oh God, what did you do? I did what I had to do. What any real man would do when someone threatens his family. The line went quiet except for Lorna's ragged breathing. Tomorrow morning, Hubert continued. You're going to pack your things and leave my house. You can go to your sister's in Connecticut or find an apartment or move to Mars. I don't care. But you're not going to live in my house anymore. Hubert, please. Brett will be coming home tomorrow afternoon. He's going to finish his senior year at Marblehead High, then go to Maine Maritime Academy on the scholarship I've arranged. You will not contact him, visit him, or interfere with his life in any way. You can't keep me from seeing my own son. I can't keep you from trying. But Brett's seen who you really are now. He's seen that you chose a stranger over your own child. He's seen that you cared more about your boyfriend's comfort than your son's safety. Do you really think he's going to welcome you back into his life? No answer. The divorce papers will be served next week. You'll get exactly what you brought to this marriage 15 years ago. Nothing. The house stays with me. The savings stay with me. The life we built stays with me. That's not fair. Fair. Hubert's voice carried 23 years of command authority. You threw our son into the street for refusing to call another man father. You spent $40,000 of our money supporting a con artist. You stood by while he planned to steal our house and have me killed. And you want to talk about fair? I didn't know about any of that. I swear I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Lorna was crying now, real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd used during arguments about his time at sea. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. You made your choice. You chose Ricardo over your family. Now you get to live with that choice. But Ricardo's gone. You made him go away. Yes, I did. So there's no one left. I have no one left. Hubert looked at the house he'd bought for her, at the windows where she'd once waited for him to come home from the sea, at the life they'd built together before she threw it all away for a stranger's promises. You had someone. You had a husband who loved you and a son who respected you and a life that most people would kill for. You traded all of that for a con artist and his lies. I can change. I can be different. I can. No, you can't. Because this isn't about making mistakes. This is about who you are when it matters. And when it mattered most, you chose wrong. Please, Hubert, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything. This is what you did. I'm just making sure everyone understands the consequences. He ended the call and started the truck. Tomorrow, Brett would come home to a house that was truly theirs again. Lorna would pack her things and disappear into whatever life she could build without the safety net of other people's money and other people's love. And Ricardo Carr would simply cease to exist as if he'd never been more than a bad dream, which, in a way, was exactly what he'd been. Chapter 9. Clear Waters. 6 months later, Hubert stood on the deck of the Iron Maiden as she approached Boston Harbor, the autumn sun painting the water gold and crimson. Brett stood beside him, taller now, broader through the shoulders, wearing the uniform of a Maine Maritime Academy cadet. Dad, you sure you're okay with me taking the scholarship to MMA instead of sailing with you? Son, I've been preparing you for this your whole life. A Floyd needs to understand the sea, but he also needs to understand that there's more than one way to command it. Brett nodded, then looked at his father carefully. Any word from Mom? Your mother sent a Christmas card to Mickey's Marina last year, postmarked from Arizona. I assume she's found some new life out there. Do you ever miss her? Hubert considered the question seriously. I miss who I thought she was. But it turns out that person never really existed. What about Ricardo? What about him? Did he really just disappear? Hubert looked at his son, 17 years old, smart enough to ask the right questions, wise enough to understand that some answers were better left unspoken. Some people, Hubert said carefully, make choices that put them in conflict with forces they don't understand. When that happens, sometimes they just fade away. Brett nodded slowly, like a ship that goes off course in a storm and never finds its way back to port. Something like that. They stood in comfortable silence as the harbor grew larger. Behind them, 23 years of cargo runs, storms weathered, and challenges overcome. Ahead, Brett's future at the academy, and eventually his own command. Dad, yeah, thank you for coming home when I needed you. Son, I would have swum back from the middle of the Atlantic if that's what it took. Brett smiled. I know. That's what makes you different from other people. As the Iron Maiden approached her berth, Hubert reflected on the events of the past 6 months. Lorna had disappeared quietly, taking only her personal belongings and leaving no forwarding address. The divorce had been finalized without her contesting any of the terms. Ricardo Carr had simply vanished. His last known location was a meeting with potential business partners that no one could quite remember arranging. The house in Marblehead was theirs again, clean of intruders and betrayal. Brett had finished his senior year with honors, largely thanks to the stability of knowing his father would always be there when it mattered. The scholarship to Maine Maritime Academy was just the beginning of what Hubert hoped would be a long and successful career for his son. Captain Floyd, First Officer Rodriguez approached with a harbor pilot's paperwork. "We're cleared for berth 7. Should have her tied up within the hour." "Thank you, Rodriguez." "And Rodriguez?" "Yes, sir. After we're secured, I'm taking a month of shore leave. Family time." Rodriguez smiled. In 8 years of sailing with Captain Floyd, he'd never seen the man take more than 2 weeks off at a time. "Understood, sir. The ship will be ready when you get back." As the tugs guided the Iron Maiden toward her berth, Hubert felt the satisfaction of another successful voyage completed. But more than that, he felt the deeper satisfaction of a man who'd faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, his family intact, his honor preserved. Some men, when threatened, retreat or compromise or hope that problems will solve themselves. Hubert Floyd was not that kind of man. He was the kind who remembered that sometimes the only way to deal with a storm is to sail straight through it, no matter how dark the water gets. And when the storm passes, you're still standing on your own deck, under your own flag, with the people who matter most standing beside you. The rest, the betrayers, the thieves, the ones who mistake kindness for weakness, they either learn to respect the storm or they disappear beneath it. Either way, the sea always wins in the end. And Hubert Floyd had always been a man of the sea. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.